The Alabama sun, a brutal, unforgiving eye in a pale sky, beat down upon Creekwood County in the spring of 1910. Dust hung thick in the air, a golden haze that coated every leaf and window pane, and the smell of dry earth and pine resin was as constant as the cicada's shrill song. Dr. Alistair Finch, a man in his late 30s with a perpetually weary stoop and eyes that had seen too much human suffering for his years, pulled his horse and buggy to a halt before the Marlow homestead. The place was an anomaly, a blot on the landscape. Unlike the neat, whitewashed cabins of their neighbors, the Marlow house was a decrepit, grey-boarded thing, its porch sagging like a tired old man, and its windows staring out like vacant eyes. Alistair had been serving the rural communities of Creekwood for 3 years, a city-trained physician who had traded the sterile clinics of Boston for the muddy, fever-ridden backroads of the American South. He was an outsider, always would be, but his reputation for honesty and a quiet competence had earned him a grudging respect. Still, the Marlows were a different kind of patient. The local whispers called them the Creekwood Healers, a term that carried a strange mix of reverence and fear. They eschewed modern medicine, relying instead on a strange, secretive form of herbalism passed down through generations. People came from miles around to seek their remedies, but no one ever stayed for long. Alistair had never had a reason to visit until today. His call had come from a frantic neighbor, a woman named Martha who had found old Silas Marlow, the family patriarch, sitting on his porch, unresponsive. As Alistair stepped out of the buggy, a wave of oppressive heat hit him, but it was the silence that was truly unsettling. No chickens clucked, no dogs barked. The usual symphony of a working farm was absent. He mounted the creaking steps, the wood groaning a protest under his weight. The door was ajar, and a low guttural moan drifted out from within. Inside, the air was thick with a cloying, earthy odor, a mix of dried herbs, sweat, and something else, something vaguely sickly and sweet. The light was dim, strained through dusty panes. The room was cluttered with glass jars of murky liquids, bundles of dried plants hanging from the rafters, and strange-looking clay pots. Silas Marlow, a man of 60 with a face like a dried-up riverbed, sat in his rocking chair. His skin was sallow, stretched taut over his bones. His eyes were open but unfocused, fixed on a point in the distance. He was rocking slowly, a rhythmic, disturbing motion. His moans were quiet, a soft, tormented sound. "Mr. Marlow." Alistair's voice was low, professional. He reached for the man's wrist, but a gnarled hand shot out from a shadowy corner and slapped his away. "Don't touch him." The voice was high and reedy. It belonged to Esmeralda, Silas's wife. She was a woman of the same age, but her face was a mask of suspicion and distrust. She clutched a small woven basket to her chest, as if it were a shield. "He's purging the evil. The humors are unbalanced. The fever must break on its own." Alistair didn't argue. He had learned long ago that logic was a useless tool against ingrained belief. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I'm a doctor. I need to examine him. His pulse is weak and his skin is cold." "He's been drinking the black root tonic," she said, her eyes fixed on her husband with a disturbing mix of worry and pride. "It cleanses the spirit, drives the sickness out. We've always done it this way." Alistair felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He'd heard of the black root. It was a potent mixture of various herbs, some of which were known to be toxic in large doses. He managed to check Silas's pupils. They were dilated and unresponsive. A glance at his hands showed strange, dark blotches on his skin, almost like bruising. This wasn't a simple fever. It was poisoning. "What's in the tonic, Mrs. Marlow?" he asked, his voice now edged with a quiet urgency. "It's a family secret," she retorted, pulling the basket closer. "The spirits guide our hand. It's not for outsiders to know." Alistair sighed, turning his attention to Silas's son, Elias. a broad-shouldered man with a face as grim and silent as his father's. Elias stood in the corner, his eyes fixed on the rocking chair, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He looked terrified, and his silent fear was more telling than any of Esmeralda's pronouncements. "Elias, he's in a bad way," Alistair said, trying to bypass the matriarch. "He needs medical attention. We need to get him to the hospital in Millersville." Esmeralda let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "And let your scalpels and potions poison him? We are the Marlows. We heal ourselves." Suddenly, Silas's rhythmic rocking stopped. His head lolled to the side, and a low, rattling gasp escaped his lips. His eyes, still wide and vacant, rolled back into his head. The dark splotches on his skin seemed to deepen, spreading like ink. A thin, black fluid began to seep from the corner of his mouth. Esmeralda shrieked, dropping her basket. "No, it's not the root. It's the curse of the hollowed man." Alistair moved quickly, pushing past her. He felt for a pulse, but there was none. Silas Marlow was dead. As he stood up, he saw Elias staring at the body, his face ashen, and a horrifying realization dawned on Alistair. The fear in Elias's eyes wasn't just for his father. It was for himself. It was a look of someone who knew a terrible truth, a truth that was about to consume him too. "Elias," Alistair said, his voice quiet. "What did he drink?" "The truth. What was in that tonic?" Elias just shook his head, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. "It wasn't the root, Doctor. It was something else. It came from the well. He's hollowed out." The words hung in the oppressive air. Hollowed out. A term that seemed to describe not only the look on Silas's face, but also the empty, echoing silence of the homestead. Alistair glanced at the open door, a strange wind now seeming to blow into the house, bringing with it a chill that had nothing to do with the sun. He had just witnessed a death that looked like a tragic case of poisoning, but the fear in Elias's eyes suggested a far more sinister explanation. An explanation that had nothing to do with magic or spirits, but with something far more tangible and terrifying. To all the new subscribers, thank you for joining us on this journey. If you're enjoying this story, please make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter of this chilling tale. The scent of death was a tangible presence in the Marlow house, thick and metallic, a grim counterpoint to the sickly sweet herbal odor. Alistair's medical bag lay on a dusty table, a symbol of a profession that had arrived too late. He stood over Silas Marlow's body, the man's features now settled into a grotesque stillness, the dark blotches on his skin stark against his pallid complexion. The unsettling phrase, "He's hollowed out," echoed in his mind. "What do you mean, Elias?" Alistair pressed, his voice firm but not aggressive. "What came from the well?" Elias flinched, his shoulders hunched as if under a great weight. He looked at his mother, who had collapsed onto a stool, sobbing quietly into her hands, muttering about curses and omens. "The well water, it's been different. Tastes earthy, like clay. Papa said it was a sign. The earth spirits were giving us a new kind of medicine." Alistair's medical mind immediately dismissed the spiritual explanation and gravitated toward a more logical one. Contamination. "Did you all drink from that well?" Elias nodded, his eyes wide. "We always have. But a few days ago it started smelling. A bit like sulfur, but not quite. Papa thought it was potent, said it was the root water. He was drinking it straight." "And you?" Alistair asked, his gaze fixed on the young man. "Just to cook, and a little to drink," Elias said, his voice barely a whisper. He'd been experimenting, mixing different herbs in it. He said he was making a perfect cure. He looked away, his jaw tight. He'd been doing it for weeks. Said he was the healthiest he'd ever felt. Until this morning. Alistair's suspicions hardened. The black fluid, the blotches, the rapid decline. It wasn't a sudden poisoning from a single dose, it was something cumulative. A slow poison, perhaps. He knew that many of the local folk remedies were dangerous, but this was something else. This was a targeted, deliberate concoction, even if the intent behind it was well-meaning. "I need to see the well," Alistair stated, moving toward the door. Esmeralda's sobbing turned into a low growl. "You stay away from our well, it's sacred. It's blessed." "It's poisoned," Alistair countered, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And it killed your husband." He turned to Elias. "Show me." Reluctantly, Elias led him out the back door, past a neglected garden choked with weeds, to a stone well. The old wooden bucket, covered in a thin layer of grime, rested on the well's low wall. Alistair leaned over, peering into the dark abyss. He could see the surface of the water, a murky, unsettling brown. A faint, acrid smell rose from the depths, not quite sulfur, but something chemical and sharp, a smell that made his nostrils sting. "When did this start?" Alistair asked, his voice low. "About 2 weeks ago," Elias said, his shoulders slumping. "Papa said he'd been given a vision, that the well was speaking to him, that it wanted to help us. He started to hear things. Whispers, he called them." Alistair's mind, ever logical, filed this away as a symptom of the poisoning. Hallucinations, a common side effect of certain toxins. He looked back at Elias. "And he started drinking this root water then?" "More than that. He said the spirits told him to add special things, to fortify the medicine." Elias's voice cracked. "He'd go out to the fields at night, come back with things." "What things?" Alistair's curiosity was piqued, and a chill that had nothing to do with the Alabama heat traced a line down his spine. "I don't know," Elias said, shaking his head vehemently. "He kept it secret, said the medicine would only work if it was pure, unseen." He paused, a haunted look in his eyes. "Sometimes he'd bring back a small jar with a strange dark liquid, not water, thicker. He'd add it to the well, just a few drops at a time." Alistair's mind raced. What could be so potent that a few drops would contaminate an entire well? He knew of no local plants or minerals that fit the description. Unless it wasn't a local plant at all. Suddenly, a loud, panicked cry came from the house. "Elias! The sickness! It's in me!" Esmeralda stumbled out onto the porch, her face pale, a look of abject terror in her eyes. She clutched her stomach, a low moan escaping her lips. "The curse! The hollowed man! He's come for me!" Alistair ran back to the house, Elias right behind him. Esmeralda collapsed on the porch, her body racked with violent tremors. Dark splotches were beginning to appear on her skin, just like on Silas. This wasn't a curse. This was a direct, terrifying consequence of drinking the same poisoned water, albeit in smaller doses. "Elias, did she drink the well water today?" Alistair demanded. "Yes, just a little. She was thirsty," Elias stammered, his own hands starting to tremble. Alistair knew he had to act fast. He knelt beside Esmeralda, his medical training kicking in, but he felt helpless. Without knowing the exact poison, he was working blind. "Elias, what did he bring back? Think, where did he get that liquid?" Elias just stared at his mother, his face a mask of paralyzing fear. He went to the old mill, said he had a meeting there, with a stranger. The old mill. An abandoned, decrepit place on the outskirts of town, rumored to be a meeting place for outcasts and drifters. Alistair's gaze flickered from Esmeralda's convulsing body to Elias, who looked as if he were watching his own death unfold. A cold, hard certainty formed in Alistair's mind. This wasn't a tragic accident. This was a carefully orchestrated plot. But to what end? And who was this stranger? A chilling thought struck him. The Marlows weren't just victims of a misguided faith in folk remedies. They were targets. and Elias, who had also been drinking the water, was next. The sun was beginning its slow, painful descent, painting the Alabama sky in hues of bruised orange and purple. The oppressive heat, however, remained, clinging to everything like a shroud. Alistair had done what he could for Esmeralda, administering what basic antidotes he had and making her as comfortable as possible, but he knew her chances were slim. The poison, whatever it was too advanced. Elias, his face a mask of silent terror, sat beside his mother, refusing to leave her side. "I have to go to the old mill," Alistair said, his voice low and determined. "I need to find out what's happening." Elias looked at him, his eyes filled with a hollow desperation. "You can't, Doctor," Papa said. He said the man he met was dangerous. He came to him with a promise of power, a way to make the healing strong again. Papa was getting old. His cures were failing. He was desperate. Alistair felt a pang of sympathy. Silas Marlow, a man who had dedicated his life to healing in his own strange way, had been exploited by a stranger who promised him a miracle cure. "Elias, your mother is dying. We need to know what this medicine is. It's our only chance." Elias hesitated, then slowly rose to his feet. "I'll take you there, but you have to promise me you'll be careful. He seemed to know things about us, about our family, things no stranger should know." The walk to the old mill was a tense, silent affair. Elias led the way, his head bowed, a figure of profound sorrow and apprehension. The mill itself was a skeletal ruin, its great wooden wheel rotted and still, its windows like empty eye sockets. A strange metallic smell hung in the air here, stronger than at the Marlow homestead. It was the same acrid chemical smell Alistair had detected at the well, a smell that had been faint at the well but was overpowering here. "He's been coming here for a few weeks," Elias whispered, his voice hushed. "Always at night. Papa would bring him herbs, and the man would give him this black liquid. He called it the ghost of the land. Said it was the purest medicine." Alistair's mind raced, piecing together the fragments. A stranger with a pure liquid, a desperate old man, a contaminated well, and now two people dying. It was a cold, calculated plot. But why? Elias pointed to a small, rotted shack behind the mill, a place that was nearly hidden by a thick tangle of vines. He met him in there. The shack was dark and foreboding. Alistair drew a small lantern from his medical bag and lit it. The flickering light revealed a scene of shocking disarray. The floor was covered in spilled liquids and strange powders. There were crude diagrams scrawled on the walls, not of plants or herbs, but of human anatomy, with certain organs circled and marked with symbols. It was the work of a madman, or a chemist with a sinister agenda. Suddenly, a glimmer of light caught Alistair's eye. On a small table in the corner, a half-filled bottle of the black liquid sat next to a small, leather-bound book. The liquid had the same pungent metallic odor. The book was a ledger. Alistair's hands trembled as he opened it. The first page was a chilling surprise. It was a list of names, local families, all with notes beside them. Notes about their ailments, their feuds, and their vulnerabilities. And in the margins he saw the name Marlow with the chilling inscription: Silas, desperate; Elias, pliable. A perfect test case. His blood ran cold. This wasn't just a poisoning, it was a macabre experiment. This stranger was preying on the sick, the superstitious, and the vulnerable. He was testing it, Alistair said, his voice a low whisper. He was testing the poison on them. The purest medicine was just a slow-acting toxin. He looked up, his eyes now fixed on Elias's horrified face. He knew what he was doing. He was a scientist of a different kind. Elias's face crumpled. But why? Why would anyone do this? "I don't know," Alistair said, his eyes scanning the shack. "But I know he's been watching you, watching your family. He probably knows every move you make." He looked at Elias, a sudden chilling certainty in his eyes. "He knows you were with me. He knows we're here. We need to leave now." As if on cue, a loud, resounding thud came from outside. The door to the shack slammed shut, the sound echoing through the ruined mill. Alistair and Elias rushed to it, but the ancient wood was wedged tight, a heavy object rammed against it from the outside. A low, sinister chuckle came from beyond the door. It was a man's voice, cold and devoid of any emotion. "You've found my little laboratory, Doctor," the voice said, its tone calm and methodical. "And my perfect test subject. But the experiment is not yet complete." Alistair's heart pounded in his chest. He had stumbled into a trap, a deadly one. The man outside wasn't some mystical healer. He was a sociopath, a meticulous poisoner who saw people not as human beings, but as test subjects. Alistair's quiet life as a rural doctor had just collided with a methodical, psychopathic killer. And he and Elias were now trapped in the very place where the poison was brewed, with the man who brewed it standing just outside. The air in the shack grew thick with the smell of mold and fear. Elias hammered on the door, his desperate pleas echoing in the small space, but the solid thud from the other side only reaffirmed their imprisonment. Alistair, his mind racing, tried to think logically. The man had to be a local, someone who knew the back roads, the family histories, the local superstitions. He wasn't just a drifter, he was a predator who had chosen his hunting ground with clinical precision. "It's no use, Elias," Alistair said, his voice low and steady despite the frantic pounding of his heart. "He's not letting us out. We need to find another way." He scanned the small shack, his lantern casting long, dancing shadows. There was a small, grimy window high on one wall, too small for a man to fit through. The walls themselves were rickety, but too thick to break down easily. They were trapped. A voice from outside shattered the silence, calm and chillingly articulate. "The Marlows believe in a world of spirits and omens, a world where illness is a spiritual imbalance. I simply gave them what they asked for." The man laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "I gave them a spirit of death, bottled and purified." "Who are you?" Alistair demanded, his voice ringing with a mix of fury and fear. "I am a man of science, Doctor," the voice replied, its tone almost conversational. "You see, while you've been busy curing the symptoms, I've been studying the cause. Human frailty. The mind is a powerful tool, Doctor. Tell a man a substance will heal him, and his belief can amplify its effects. Tell a man a substance will curse him, and his fear can hasten his demise." Alistair's blood ran cold. The man wasn't just a poisoner. He was a twisted psychologist, manipulating belief and superstition to create a self-fulfilling prophecy of fear. He had used the Marlow family's beliefs against them. "You gave him a poison and called it a cure," Alistair accused, his voice thick with disgust. "You're a monster." "A monster?" The voice from outside was amused. "I am an observer, an artist, a man of medicine who understands that the body is just an instrument, a delicate machine. I simply gave it a new purpose." There was a brief silence, then the sound of scraping. "The purpose in this case was to be a beacon, to draw you here. I've been watching you, Doctor. A man of reason, a man of science, a man who scoffs at superstition. I needed you to witness this, to see the true power of my work." Alistair looked at Elias, whose face was a mask of pale horror. The man was not just a killer, he was a showman, a psychopath who needed an audience, and he had chosen Alistair. "He's been watching me," Elias stammered, his eyes darting around the shack. "Yes," Alistair said, his voice grim. "He watched your father. He saw his desperation. He saw his faith in old ways. He knew exactly what to say to make him trust him." He turned back to the door. "What is the poison? What did you give him?" The man's laugh was sharp and cruel. "It's a secret, a recipe refined through years of careful study, a poison that mimics a curse. A poison that brings about the hollowed man, a slow, agonizing demise that looks exactly like a spiritual affliction. The black fluid, the tremors, the delirium, all carefully orchestrated to look like a spiritual purge. A perfectly tragic, perfectly believable end. Suddenly the floorboards beneath Alistair's feet shifted. He looked down and saw a section of the floor, covered in dust and grime, was slightly different from the rest. It was a trap door. He knelt and brushed away the dirt, revealing a small rusted metal handle. "Don't even try, Doctor," the man's voice called from outside. "It leads to a flooded cellar, a nice watery grave. You wouldn't want to get your fine clothes wet." Alistair's heart sank. He looked at Elias, whose face had gone from terrified to resigned. The man outside wasn't just a killer, he was a tactician. He had planned every detail, every event, down to the last second. He was enjoying this, playing with them like a cat with a mouse. "Why me?" Alistair asked, a new note of defiance in his voice. "Why did you need me to see this?" The man's voice was now a low, chilling whisper. "Because I needed to test my greatest work, my masterpiece, a poison that not only kills the body, but also the mind. It makes a man go mad with fear, to see ghosts and demons where there are none. A poison that makes a sane man believe he is cursed. And when he dies not from the poison, but from his own terror." He paused, and Alistair heard the scrape of something against the wood outside. "You, Doctor, with your logic and reason, you're the perfect subject. I want to see if your rational mind can withstand the terror. I want to see if you can be hollowed out." Alistair's blood ran cold. This wasn't just about the Marlows, this was about him. He had stumbled into a killer's deadly game, and the rules had just been made clear. The killer didn't want to simply kill him, he wanted to break him, he wanted to make him a believer. The floorboards of the shack creaked ominously under the weight of Alistair's dread. The chilling words of the man outside echoed in his mind, a slow, methodical poison in themselves. He was to be a subject in a monstrous experiment, a test of his sanity against a carefully crafted cocktail of fear and toxin. "We have to get out of here," Elias said, his voice a low, frantic whisper. He began to desperately tug at the trap door, but Alistair put a hand on his shoulder. "Stop. He's right. It's a trap. A flooded cellar would just be a different kind of grave." Alistair's mind, despite the fear, was working furiously. He had to think like a doctor, not a victim. He looked around the small space, his lantern casting long, flickering shadows. The diagrams on the wall, the various jars and spilled liquids. This wasn't just a random assortment. It was a laboratory. Alistair's eyes landed on a small clay jar sitting on a makeshift shelf. It had a crudely drawn skull on the side. He felt a jolt of recognition. He'd seen that symbol before, in an old medical text, a symbol for a potent neurotoxin. He cautiously picked it up. It was empty. The man had already used it. He looked at the other bottles and jars. Most were labeled with strange, invented names. Spirit's blood, Willow's tear, ghost dust. But Alistair could see through the theatricality. They were all chemicals, powders and liquids that could be found in a rudimentary chemistry set. But here, in the hands of a sociopath, they were instruments of death. Suddenly, a section of the wall beside them gave a loud, groaning protest. Alistair and Elias turned, just as a large, rotted board fell inward, revealing a gap just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. It wasn't an escape route, but an access point, and on the other side, in the murky, moonlit gloom, stood their tormentor. He was a tall, thin man with a gaunt face and eyes that held a disturbing, cold intelligence. He wore a simple, dark suit that was too formal for the setting, and his hands were encased in pristine white gloves. He looked not like a madman, but like a meticulous undertaker. He held a small glass vial in one hand, the black liquid inside shimmering in the faint light. "I see you found an escape route," the man said, his voice flat, and unnervingly calm. But it only leads to my parlor, and I'm afraid the welcome is not a warm one. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, the crunch of dead leaves beneath his shoes the only sound. Alistair instinctively pushed Elias behind him. "What do you want?" "I want to see the test to its conclusion, Doctor," the man said, a faint predatory smile playing on his lips. "I've proven that superstition can be a tool, that a man's faith can be twisted into a weapon against him. But you are a man of logic, a man who believes in nothing but what he can see. I want to see what happens when your logic shatters, when your rational mind sees the impossible." He held up the vial. "This is a new batch, stronger, faster. It will kill you, but before it does, it will show you things." Alistair felt a cold sweat break out on his brow. The man wasn't just a poisoner. He was a self-styled god of terror, a maestro of psychological torture. He wanted to break Alistair, to force him to abandon his beliefs and to believe in the hollowed man himself. "I've been watching you for a month, Doctor," the man continued, his voice now a low, conspiratorial whisper. "You came here to help people, but you've seen things you can't explain. The sickness that looks like a curse, the fevers that seem to come from nowhere. You've been searching for a logical explanation. I am that explanation. I am the reason you've been so disturbed." Alistair felt a jolt of recognition. He had indeed seen strange, unexplainable illnesses in the area over the last few months. Cases that had no medical basis, symptoms that didn't fit any known disease. He had dismissed them as unique local illnesses, but now he knew. They were all a part of this man's monstrous experiment. The man took another step forward, his eyes fixed on Alistair, a chilling triumph in their depths. "You are my final test, Doctor. I want to see if a man of reason can be driven to madness, a man who sees only the physical world. I want to make you see a ghost." He chuckled softly. "And when you do, you'll know that the true power lies not in the remedy, but in the fear." Elias, who had been standing silent behind Alistair, let out a choked gasp. He had seen something, or someone, in the shadows behind the man. Alistair's eyes darted to Elias, then back to the poisoner. The man, seeing their reaction, simply smiled. A cold, empty expression. He wasn't alone. Alistair heard a rustle of leaves from a thicket of pine trees behind the man. A figure, tall and gaunt, emerged from the darkness. It was a man, and in his hand he held a shovel. His face was obscured by the shadows, but his posture was unnervingly familiar. It was the way Silas Marlow had stood, a perpetual, weary stoop. Alistair's heart pounded. Was this an accomplice, a fellow sociopath? Or was this man so good at his craft that he was making him see things? "What's this?" Alistair's voice was a low growl, a mixture of disbelief and fear. The man in the suit simply smiled. "A final player in our little drama. He's been helping me prepare the stage. He's been waiting for you, Doctor." The figure with the shovel took a step forward, the moonlight catching a strange, unnerving glint in his hand. It wasn't just a shovel, it was a crude digging tool, and on the end of it, a small dark bundle was tied with twine. As the man came closer, Alistair saw it more clearly. It was a bundle of dried herbs, the same kind of herbs Esmeralda had been using. And then, as the figure stepped fully into the light, Alistair saw his face. It was the face of Silas Marlow, his eyes wide and vacant, his skin covered in the same dark blotches. But Silas Marlow was dead. Alistair felt his blood run cold. Was he seeing a ghost? Or was this just a hallucination? The poisoner's sermon about the power of the mind came rushing back. Alistair had to make a choice. He had to either believe in a ghost or find a logical explanation for what he was seeing. A man with a corpse, perhaps? A puppet? Or was the poison already working? The terror was a palpable thing, a physical presence, and Alistair felt his carefully constructed world of logic and reason beginning to crack. The spectre of Silas Marlow stood before Alistair and Elias, a horrifying, silent accusation. Alistair's rational mind screamed for an explanation, a disguise, a look-alike, or a macabre puppetry. But the scene was too perfect, too chillingly realistic. The man in the suit smiled, a thin, cruel line on his face. He was watching Alistair, waiting for his reaction, waiting for the logic to crumble. "My dear doctor," the poisoner said, his voice a theatrical whisper. "As you can see, the dead can still walk. They can still serve a purpose. He is a testament to my work." Elias let out a whimper, his hands covering his mouth. "Papa, he's a monster." Alistair, however, refused to be a part of the spectacle. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his eyes fixed on the man in the suit. "He's not Silas. He's an imposter, a charlatan." The man's smile widened. "Is he? Look closely, doctor. Is the face not the same? The marks on his skin? The way he carries himself?" Alistair's medical training took over. He wasn't looking at a ghost, he was looking at a man, a real man. But he couldn't be Silas. Silas was dead, his body in the house. Unless, he remembered Elias's words. "He's been going out to the fields at night. Sometimes he'd bring back a small jar with a strange, dark liquid." The poison wasn't just in the well, it was in the Marlows. But what if it wasn't just a poison, but something more? Something that could mimic death, but not cause it? Alistair's gaze flickered from the man in the suit to the ghost of Silas Marlow. The man was thin, emaciated, and the dark splotches on his skin were unmistakable. But his eyes, they were not the vacant eyes of a dead man. There was a flicker of something in them, a quiet awareness, a silent plea. "This is not Silas," Alistair said, a new confidence in his voice. "He's just another victim." He looked at the man in the suit. "You didn't just give them a poison, you gave them a substance that made them look dead. That's why he was hollowed out. You were harvesting something from them, but why?" The man's smile finally faltered. Alistair's logic had just hit a nerve. He hadn't been testing the poison, he had been using it as a tool to create a state of suspended animation, a state that mimicked death. "You're a doctor, not a detective," the man hissed, his voice losing its calm, theatrical tone. "You shouldn't be asking such questions." Alistair felt a surge of adrenaline. He was getting close. "You're not a scientist. You're a grave robber. You're using them to acquire something. What is it? What are you after?" The man's eyes narrowed, and a sudden, furious rage contorted his features. He raised the vial in his hand, a clear sign that the game was over. "It's time for the final act, Doctor. You've asked too many questions. You've broken the illusion. Now you will learn what it feels like to be hollowed out." He took a step forward, but as he did, the ghost of Silas Marlow moved. He took a single, deliberate step toward the man in the suit, his eyes, once vacant, now filled with a cold, terrifying focus. He raised the shovel, and with a grunt, he brought it down with a sickening thud. The blow was aimed not at Alistair, but at the man in the suit's leg. The man let out a yelp of pain and stumbled, the vial of poison flying from his hand and shattering on the ground. The black liquid spread across the dusty earth like a stain of dark blood. The ghost of Silas Marlow stood over the man, his chest heaving, his face a mask of silent fury. Alistair and Elias stood frozen in disbelief. It was as if the dead had truly risen. But Alistair's mind, still racing, had found a new, more horrifying explanation. The man who had been with the poisoner all along was not Silas Marlow. He was a look-alike, another victim, made to mimic the patriarch's sickness. But the blow from the shovel was too real. The pain on the poisoner's face was too authentic. The man in the suit, now writhing in pain, looked up at Alistair, his eyes filled with a new kind of terror. He's not supposed to be able to do that," he stammered, his voice filled with a genuine, unadulterated fear. Suddenly a loud, piercing shriek came from the Marlow homestead. Alistair and Elias turned, their hearts in their throats. Esmeralda's voice, high and panicked, cut through the night. "Elias! The fire! He's come back for us!" Alistair looked back at the man in the suit, whose face was now pale. He had set a fire. The game wasn't just a trap. It was a distraction. He wanted them here, to be his audience, while his plan at the homestead reached its terrifying conclusion. But the ghost of Silas Marlow had just shattered his illusion. Alistair realized with a chilling certainty that the man with the shovel was not a victim at all. He was a partner in this macabre plot, a silent accomplice who had just turned on his master. "Why?" Alistair whispered, his eyes fixed on the man with the shovel, a man who, until moments ago, had been a ghost. "Why did you do that?" The man looked at Alistair, his face a grim, resolute mask. He said nothing, but his eyes, no longer vacant, held a fierce, cold resolve. He was not a ghost, and he was not a victim. He was a cold-blooded killer, a man who had just betrayed his partner and set a new, terrifying game in motion. Alistair's terror was now replaced with a new, more profound dread. The fire was just a part of the plan, and he and Elias, now free, were still trapped in a far more dangerous game. The fire from the Marlow homestead painted the night sky a sickly, flickering orange. A column of thick black smoke rose into the air, a grim signal of disaster. Alistair's mind, now in a state of pure survival mode, made a horrifying connection. The ghost wasn't a hallucination or an accomplice. The man with the shovel was an entirely different person, a man who had also been poisoned, a man who had witnessed the first death and had a motive for revenge. He turned to Elias, his voice urgent. "Elias, we have to go. Your mother is in danger." Elias, his face a mask of paralyzing fear, just stood there, his eyes fixed on the burning house. "The hollowed man," he whispered. "He's come for us all." Alistair grabbed Elias's arm, pulling him along. The man in the suit, groaning in pain, was left behind. The other man, the one with the shovel, simply vanished into the darkness, a silent, menacing shadow. They ran through the fields, the dry grass rustling under their feet, the smell of smoke growing stronger with every step. The sound of the flames, a low, voracious roar, was a grim symphony of destruction. When they finally reached the homestead, the porch was engulfed in flames, the fire licking greedily at the wooden walls. Esmeralda was nowhere to be seen. "Mama!" Elias screamed, his voice raw with terror. He lunged for the front door, but Alistair tackled him to the ground, pulling him back from the inferno. "You can't!" Alistair yelled, his voice hoarse from the smoke. "It's too late!" But as the front wall of the house collapsed with a groan and a shower of sparks, a figure emerged from the side window. It was Esmeralda, her face and hands blackened with soot, her eyes wide with terror. She scrambled out, her body trembling, and collapsed on the grass. Alistair and Elias rushed to her side. She was alive, but barely. She clutched her chest, her breathing shallow and ragged. He came back, the man from the mill. He came for the last of us. "Who, Mama?" Elias begged, tears streaming down his sooty face. "The man with the shovel?" Esmeralda shook her head, her eyes fixed on Alistair. "The doctor, the one who came before. He gave us the tonics, the ones with the black liquid. He told Silas it was a gift. He said he was the new heir. The new healer." Alistair's blood ran cold. He had assumed the man with the shovel was an accomplice. But what if he was the poisoner himself? What if the man in the suit was just a part of a larger, more twisted plan? Esmeralda's eyes rolled back in her head, and she convulsed once, her body going rigid. The dark splotches on her skin, once faint, were now a horrifying, mottled pattern. She was dead, the last of the Marlows. Elias let out a raw, anguished cry. his hands covering his face. Alistair, however, felt a new, cold clarity. The man with the shovel was the poisoner. He had been a part of the Marlow family all along, or at least a man who had inserted himself into their lives. The man in the suit was not the true killer. He was a pawn, a distraction, a man who had a reason to be at the old mill, but who wasn't the master. The true killer had been a silent observer, a man who had used the superstitions of a family and a desperate man's desire for legacy to orchestrate a perfect, methodical murder. Alistair felt a deep, profound sense of failure. He had been so focused on the man in the suit, the theatrics, the poison, that he had missed the most important piece of the puzzle. The killer wasn't a scientist or a madman. He was a part of the family, a man who had seen an opportunity and taken it with cold, calculating precision. He looked at Elias, the last of the Marlows, huddled on the ground, sobbing. The house was a smouldering ruin, the family's legacy of folk healing and superstition now reduced to ashes. The poisoner had not just killed them, he had erased them. Alistair had to make a choice. He could stay here, a witness to a horrific crime, or he could hunt down the man with the shovel, the man who was now a phantom in the night, the man who was not a ghost, but a cold, calculating killer. He looked at the wreckage of the Marlow family, the culmination of a horrifying psychological game, and knew he had to do something. He had to stop this man before he found his next victim, his next family to hollow out. If you're captivated by this chilling mystery, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Every like, share, and comment helps us bring more dark tales to life. Join our community and stay tuned for the next thrilling chapter of the Marlow family. The moon, a thin sliver of bone, cast a spectral light over the charred remains of the Marlow homestead. Elias, now utterly alone, was a huddled silhouette of grief against the smouldering ruins. Alistair, his own grief and fury a cold, hard knot in his gut, had to make a choice. He could wait for the morning and the inevitable arrival of the authorities, or he could act. The man with the shovel, the true poisoner, was a ghost in the night, and Alistair felt a fierce, burning need to find him. "Elias," Alistair said, his voice low and firm, "I need you to stay here, stay away from the ruins. I'm going to find him." Elias looked up, his eyes wide and hollow. "He'll kill you, Doctor. He knows things. He knows what people fear. He'll turn you inside out." "I have to try," Alistair said. He turned and walked away, his heart pounding in his chest. He was no detective, no bounty hunter. He was a doctor, but he had been an audience to a horrific crime, a cold, calculated murder, and he couldn't stand by and let a killer walk free. He walked back toward the old mill, the stench of burnt wood and chemicals a sickening mix in the air. The man in the suit was gone. The rain had begun to fall, a slow, gentle drizzle that was washing away the bloodstains and the shattered glass. Alistair's eyes scanned the muddy earth, and he saw them. Fresh footprints. Not just his and Elias's, but a third set, deep and resolute, leading away from the mill and into the dense thicket of pine trees. He followed the prints, his heart a frantic drumbeat against his ribs. The rain was now a steady downpour, making the earth slick and treacherous. He could barely see in the darkness, the only light coming from the occasional flash of lightning. The air was filled with the scent of wet pine needles and something else, something familiar and deeply unsettling. The faint metallic scent of the poison. The trail led him deeper into the woods, toward the back of the Marlow property, a place where the trees grew thick, and the underbrush was a tangled mess of thorns and briars. The land here was wild and unforgiving, a perfect place for a ghost to hide. Alistair pushed through the branches, his clothes tearing on the sharp thorns, his skin prickling with cold and anticipation. He heard a sound up ahead, a low, rhythmic scratching, like a shovel scraping against the earth. He slowed his pace, moving carefully, his breath caught in his throat. He parted a thick curtain of vines and saw a small, makeshift clearing. In the middle of it, a man was digging a shallow grave. It was the man with the shovel. He was wearing a dark, simple coat, and his face was now visible in the faint moonlight. Alistair's blood ran cold. He knew the man. He wasn't a stranger. He was Thomas, the local handyman, a quiet, unassuming man who had done odd jobs for the Marlows for years. A man who was a silent observer, a man who knew the family's secrets. He watched as Thomas finished the grave, then he knelt down and placed a small, dark bundle in the hole. Alistair couldn't see what it was, but he knew it was a vial of the poison, the ghost of the land. Thomas then took a small leather-bound book from his pocket and placed it beside the vial. The book was a ledger, the same kind of ledger he had seen at the old mill. But this one was different. This one had more names, more notes. Alistair's mind, a whirlwind of fear and confusion, now settled on a horrifying truth. Thomas wasn't just the Marlow's poisoner. He was a serial killer, a methodical monster who had been preying on the sick and the vulnerable in Creekwood County for months, using their superstitions and their fears against them. He had been creating the unexplainable illnesses Alistair had been struggling with. He was the root of all the terror. Suddenly, a twig snapped under Alistair's foot. Thomas's head shot up, his eyes dark and cold, fixing on Alistair. His face, once placid and kind, was now a mask of pure, predatory hatred. He didn't say a word. He simply rose to his feet, a sinister, knowing smile playing on his lips. He knew. He had been expecting Alistair. Alistair's heart hammered against his ribs. He had no weapon, no way to defend himself. Thomas, on the other hand, held a shovel, a tool that had already been used for murder. The rain continued to fall, the sound of the drops hitting the leaves a soft, relentless rhythm. Alistair was alone, in the middle of nowhere, with a methodical killer who saw him not as a human being, but as a final, fascinating subject. The terror was a palpable thing, and Alistair felt his carefully constructed world of logic and reason beginning to crack. He was no longer a doctor, he was a man, trapped in a game of cat and mouse with the hollowed man himself. The silence between Alistair and Thomas was more terrifying than any scream. The rain was the only witness, a steady, relentless drumming that soaked them to the bone. Thomas stood over the shallow grave, his face illuminated by the occasional flash of lightning. He didn't move, didn't say a word. He simply watched Alistair, his eyes holding a cold, unsettling intelligence. Why? Alistair finally managed to say, his voice a hoarse whisper. Why the Marlows? Thomas smiled, a slow, predatory expression that didn't reach his eyes. The Marlows were perfect. They were the epitome of what is wrong with this place. They believed in spirits, in magic, in old wives' tales. They were a festering sore on the body of reason. I simply gave them what they deserved. A clean end. He gestured to the shallow grave. Their fear was their undoing. They believed in a curse, so I simply gave them a curse. A real one. A physical one. Alistair felt a shiver run down his spine. The man wasn't a madman. He was a man with a twisted, terrifying philosophy. A man who saw himself as a purifier, a cleanser of superstition. And you, Thomas said, taking a slow step forward, the shovel in his hand a menacing symbol. You are the antithesis, a man of science, a man of logic. I've been watching you, Doctor. You come here with your sterile needles and your fancy potions, and you try to fix what is fundamentally broken. You don't understand the real sickness of this land, the sickness of belief. Alistair felt a sudden, profound realization. Thomas wasn't just a killer. He was a man who believed in a warped kind of eugenics. He was purging the world of what he considered to be weak, of people who relied on faith instead of reason. He was a silent, methodical hunter, and Alistair was his new prey. What did you do to them? Alistair asked, his voice low and firm. It was a simple formula, Thomas said. his voice now a quiet, confidential whisper. "A simple neurotoxin, derived from local plants. It mimics a sickness. The tremors, the delirium, the black blotches, all signs of a spiritual purging. I simply gave them a reality that matched their beliefs. I gave them what they wanted." He took another step forward, and Alistair instinctively took one back. "The man at the mill." "A drifter," Thomas said, his eyes now fixed on Alistair. "I paid him to act as my decoy. He believed he was helping me with a scientific experiment. I told him I was a professor from the city. He never knew. He was a perfect pawn." Thomas's smile returned, cold and cruel, and when the time came, I simply disposed of him. He was a loose end, and loose ends must be tied. Alistair's heart sank. Thomas was not just a killer, he was a master manipulator. He had used the drifter, just as he had used the Marlows, to serve his own twisted purpose. And now, he was using Alistair as his final, most challenging subject. "You're going to kill me," Alistair said, a grim certainty in his voice. "Not just kill you, Doctor," Thomas said, his eyes gleaming in the dark. "I'm going to prove my point. I'm going to prove that even a man of science can be driven to madness. A man who trusts in nothing but what he can see. I'm going to show you a ghost. I'm going to make you believe." Suddenly Thomas lunged forward, not with the shovel, but with a small glass vial. Alistair, caught off guard, stumbled back, and the vial shattered on the ground. A fine black mist rose into the air, and the same acrid chemical smell filled his nostrils. He coughed, his throat burning, his eyes watering. Thomas laughed, a low, guttural sound. "It's a new batch, Doctor. Stronger, faster. It will work wonders. It will give you a glimpse into the true nature of terror." Alistair felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. His vision blurred, and the world began to spin. He stumbled back, his hands reaching out for something to hold on to. He looked at Thomas, but the man's face was now a swirling, dark mist. He blinked, and the face was gone. In its place stood a gaunt, shadowy figure, its eyes hollowed out, its mouth a gaping, silent scream. It was the hollowed man, the ghost of his own mind. Alistair's heart pounded in his ears, a frantic drumbeat of pure, unadulterated terror. He knew it was a hallucination, a side effect of the poison. But the image was so real, so tangible, that his mind could no longer tell the difference between reality and the waking nightmare. He was losing his sanity. He was becoming a victim of the very terror he had been trying to understand. He had to fight it. He had to hold on to his logic. He had to believe in his reason. But the ghost of the hollowed man was now everywhere. It was in the rustling of the leaves, the drip of the rain, the sound of his own frantic breathing. It was a terrifying, all-encompassing presence, a psychological phantom that was slowly, methodically, hollowing him out. Alistair's mind was a battlefield. One half screamed that the ghost was real, a vengeful spirit sent to claim his soul. The other half, the rational, logical half, fought back, reminding him that it was a chemical reaction, a toxin playing on his deepest fears. But the image of the hollowed man, now a figure with the face of Silas Marlow, was too vivid, too real. It was walking toward him, its hands outstretched, its eyes two black pools of nothingness. He stumbled back, his body a frantic mess of fear and adrenaline. He looked for Thomas, but the killer had become a shadow, a fleeting glimpse of a face in the darkness. The poison had done its work. It had shattered his perception of reality, plunging him into a psychological hell of his own making. Suddenly a loud, sharp crack echoed through the woods. Alistair's head snapped up. It wasn't the sound of the ghost. It was the sound of a gunshot. He looked in the direction of the sound and saw Elias, standing at the edge of the clearing, a rusted old rifle clutched in his hands. The rifle was shaking, his face a grim mask of resolve. He had followed Alistair, he had seen the terror on his face, and he had come to save him. The hollowed man, the phantom of Alistair's poisoned mind, recoiled, its form a shimmering, uncertain thing. The illusion was breaking. The sound of the gunshot, a real, tangible thing, had severed the link between the poison and his sanity. Elias, his voice a low, raw cry, called out, "Doctor, run!" Alistair didn't hesitate. He turned and ran toward Elias, the image of the hollowed man fading behind him, a defeated shadow in the rain. He heard a second gunshot, then a sickening thud. He didn't look back. He ran until his lungs were burning and the trees were a dark, endless blur. He finally reached Elias, who was standing over the body of Thomas. The killer lay on the ground, a dark stain spreading across his coat. The shovel, once a weapon, was now just a simple tool lying beside him. Elias's hands were shaking, and his face was pale, but his eyes were clear. The fear was gone. "I saw him," Elias said, his voice a low whisper. "I saw him hollowing you out. I knew it wasn't a curse. It was him. He was the sickness." Alistair, his own mind still reeling from the effects of the poison, looked at the body of Thomas, the man who had played God, and felt a profound sense of relief. The game was over. The hollowed man was dead. As the authorities arrived, Alistair, still shaken, recounted the entire story. He showed them the ledger, the notes, the evidence of a methodical, terrifying plot. The police, city men who had no time for Creekwood superstitions, were skeptical at first, but the evidence was irrefutable. The bodies of the Marlows were exhumed, and autopsies confirmed Alistair's suspicions. The deaths were not from a supernatural curse, but from a calculated, slow-acting poison. In the end, Alistair stayed in Creekwood. He had been a doctor who had come to the south to help, but he had become a witness to a terrifying psychological drama. He had seen how a man's faith could be used as a weapon, and how a family's history could be turned into a stage for a horrific crime. He never spoke of the hollowed man again, but he saw the fear in the eyes of the townsfolk. He knew that even though the killer was dead, his legacy lived on. The fear was now a part of Creekwood. Alistair looked at Elias, the last of the Marlows, who had found a new quiet life in a nearby town. The family's legacy of folk healing and superstition was gone, replaced by a quiet, pervasive terror. Elias, too, had been irrevocably changed. He had lost his family, his home, and his faith in the old ways. But in their place, he had gained something new, a grim knowledge of the true nature of evil. A knowledge that the most terrifying ghosts are not those that haunt the land, but those that are born in the minds of men. And that sometimes the most painful deaths are not from a curse, but from the simple, terrifying reality of a man's hatred. The story of the Marlow family became a whisper, a local legend told on cold, dark nights. A story of a curse, of a family that used witchcraft to heal and paid the ultimate price. A story of the hollowed man who still roamed the back roads of Creekwood, a ghost in the minds of those who believed. But Alistair, the man who had faced the true horror, knew the truth. And he knew that the most frightening thing of all was not the ghost, but the man who had created it. Thank you for your request. I hope you are satisfied with the story. Let me know if you have any further requests.